Alright, you might be wondering what this is all about. This is a quick crash course into making games for these little cheap retro gaming handhelds that have been coming out of Chinese factories for the past 5 years. They basically get thrown together with some excess parts. They're like, we don't know what to do with these, and then they just buy them up and turn them into game consoles that look like Game Boys and SPs and stuff. It's a really fun little hobby. It's possible to make your own games for them, and boy, it becomes a funny selling point. Also, to show a couple examples, I'm going to pull up Game Maker games here. I'm going to be recording this off of a camera that looks like it was from the year 1984 or something. This is Delta Tail, the Homestuck fan game that's running on a SP. This is honestly a miracle it even works. Or something like Nuclear Throne here, working at all on an RG40XX-H. I was surprised to even find out these things existed earlier this year, like around the time that 2025 started. And took maybe a couple months for the technology to get to the point that you could actually port Godot games. This is actually a case that we've made games for. Crop and Claw was a game we made last year. It's an RPG where you play as dragons, and you get to do dragon things, like Dragon Quest. The thing is that without too much effort, it was possible to get it fully running, and through the help of Portmaster and their tool set at least, we are actually able to properly release it in such a way that you could get one of these devices and just download the game. We put it up there for free as kind of like a for fun thing. But yeah, here we got like Crop and Claw 2. This one's our current game in development. It's not finished, obviously, but it's got a bunch of little fun features. You could tell it's a massive upgrade from the first game, and it runs perfectly well on an SP, an RG35XX-SP. There's a lot of these devices, so I can't really tell you how to get everything running on individual ones. The hardware is good enough for 3D. Here's a prototype of a Star Fox thing I was doing. 3D does work, and if you're clever, you can make it work really well. This stuff is where things get a little trickier. You do have to optimize quite a bit, especially when you're working with 3D, but if you can get it to work, it's really rewarding. Now you might be wondering who the hell I am. My name's not important. I do stuff, and I make games for these because it's fun. So what actually are these handhelds that I'm talking about? Like I said, they're these low-budget hardware things thrown together. Usually, for one reason or another, they got access to all these parts. They're usually like these Chinese companies or something. Anbernic or Trim UI or Retroid or something. They put together these nostalgic little form factors and fun things, and they're normally marketed towards the emulation scene, where you can go and you can like throw perfectly legal ROMs of homebrew games and nothing else on there. But these things are capable of so much more. The biggest thing being that you can write your own homebrew games based on like things that you build to ARM Linux, and they will just work on here with some elbow grease. So why would you actually want to do this is because it's really niche right now, and there is actually quite a fair size of people who will just open up Portmaster, which we'll get to later, and they will find a few games there, even if you can't actually play them fully, because a lot of these games are meant to be like bought. You can actually just get like runtimes for like Half-Life or whatever on there, but you will need to own the games. Big thing is you can show off your objects in person. Imagine just going to like, I don't know what kids go to for game developer conferences these days, but you go to one, or you go to school and college and you walk up to your teacher and you like show them this SP, and your teacher's probably old, like 30 or 40 or 1,000 or something, and they probably remembered playing like Mario Pinball on the Game Boy SP, and they're gonna be like, "Oh wow, that's so cool! You're my favorite student now," and then they give you an A. Uh, that's all. And also, you're gonna get really good at optimizing, at least for depending on how big you're going with your game. Welcome to the age of like making games in 2000 or something, where the hardware is absolutely minuscule. Uh, People who actually developed for that hardware are laughing at me right now, like, "Ooh, you only have like 1 gig of RAM. I developed for the Wii in 2006, and we only had 50." But when you we're dealing with people like hobbyists and stuff who don't know anything about this stuff anyway, so this will make you better. Also, it's just really neat. Like, your games feel different when they are running in your hand on a handheld, and I don't count Android phones because phones aren't game consoles, and I hate you. So common game engines actually do work on these things. If you work with one of these, then like you're probably good to go. Uh, with some exceptions, Love. If you're doing Lua, then Love 2D apparently works really well. I haven't done it myself. Uh, Earlier RPG Maker games, you can pluck those in, and they have runtimes that work with those. Game Maker, as I showed earlier, you had Homestuck running on the SP, and that's like the only game that anyone actually cares about. Uh, and then Godot engine is actually what we use, and the Godot engine is probably the best if you want to mess around with a lot of things because you have access to both 2D and 3D, and as of 4.4, Godot has reintroduced vertex shading, which I'll get into later with performance stuff, has made 3D actually feasible in the 4 series. So this is a bit of a process, and I'm not gonna go through all the details. This is mostly a warm up to say, hey, this is a thing you can do, and you should do it because it's fun. But the actual details are gonna depend on your specific hardware and your preference. Uh, for starters, you want to get an actual handheld. Like I said, I have the RG35XX-SP is probably my most used device. The only thing is no joysticks, but there's a bunch of devices. Like, do your own market research. If you're really budget, you can get like a G350 or an R36S. I don't recommend that. And you can just grab those cheap, even in like poor countries or if you're low income. One of these devices probably are not gonna like run you more than $100. And in the case of the G350, it's going to be like 35, 40 on one of those Chinese outlets like Alibaba. So you get yourself a handheld. You get yourself a good SD card because those like Kioxia or generic sugar wafer SD cards are really low quality. They're eventually going to burn out, especially if you're doing game development. You're going to be pushing the package data a lot, and that's going to eventually burn out the thing. So if you just get yourself a Samsung or some other SanDisk SD card, like 16 gigs, you can actually get 2 cards for a lot of these devices. One for the operating system and one for the a second slot, which you just put the data on. That lets you update your operating system. I say operating system, but custom firmware is actually the next section. Custom firmware, there is a default OS that a lot of these things run on. They're all like Linux based because the hardware is so primitive. But the stock ones that come with the actual hardware all suck. And when it comes to Portmaster doesn't really support it all because you never really know what these hardware manufacturers are doing, and it just sucks. And they have like outdated libraries, and it's a disaster. It's a complete disaster. So don't even bother wasting your time with them. Instead, you get yourself one of the custom firmwares that is Portmaster will actually support. Big ones are Mustard OS, Rocknix, Arc OS, and Anbernic. I am functionally reading off a script because I don't actually use half of these, but Rocknix is okay, and if you can get MUS to work for you, then cool. Setting up Portmaster is going to depend a little bit on your hardware and software. The firmware usually will have its own setup for Portmaster, and with a little research, you can find that stuff out easy. If you are using hardware without Wi-Fi, bear in mind a lot of these little game devices come with Wi-Fi, but some like the G350 or the R36S will not actually have Wi-Fi, and you'll either need a dongle or you'll need to do some manual setup, which is out of the scope here, but it's worth knowing about before you grab it. It's not impossible to work around, just something you'll want to keep in mind. At that point, you'll have runtimes that Portmaster provides, which will make it possible to run your game. Usually with some kind of template boot scripts. Usually you're going to have a script that the Portmaster will, or rather your custom firmware will actually boot into. And that's what's going to control loading your game, whether it be Game Maker, Godot, RPG Maker, I don't know. And then obviously you're going to want to add your game data files, which is your game. Portmaster actually provides the runtime. Usually these are all ARM Linux, like I said, and most of the time it's not going to be a big deal depending on how your program handles asset compressions and stuff. Most of the time it's not going to be a problem. Godot, you do need to like export textures a certain way, but that's for like hardware compression. Mostly to save RAM. You want to save RAM. Limitations. I want to cover these real fast to kind of give you a sense of what you're getting yourself into. First off, this is more or less how it looks when you're dealing with sub $100 devices USD, because the hardware is so cheap and the drivers are questionable depending on what you're looking at. Linux does not always have accessible drivers to Vulkan. I'm going based on the H700 CPU, which is what like the SP and various Anbernic devices carry at under $100. GLES 3.2 is typically what you're going to be developing with. If your engine has GLES 3.2, you're usually going to be at a good spot. Simple vertex shading 3D is ideal if you are doing 3D. This is why if you're going to use Godot, and especially if you're going to use Godot 4, which you probably should because of all the changes it's got, it's much better than the 3 series, it removed pixel shading until 4.4. So you're going to want to start with 4.4 if you're doing 3D. Shader compilation, when you spawn things, you're probably going to have a bit of a hitch in 3D, especially where the system has to do some kind of shader compilation. This is also going to kind of depend on your engine and runtime. Bear in mind, if you wrote your own game engine and you're using GLES 3.2, you probably optimize some of this stuff out. There's also other tricks you can do to get around this, black screen, and then you just have every object on screen while that's going on and kind of fake it, make it part of the loading process. The hardware, CPU speed, you're going to be looking at probably somewhere between a half and a third of your average desktop PC CPU. Again, very, very weak relative to what you might be used to. H700, as example, has 4 cores clocked at 1.5 gigahertz. R36S, you're going to be somewhere around 1.2 or something like that. That's the RK3326 CPU. The GPU is also going to be very weak, so you're going to see a low frame rates for 3D unless it's extremely simple. H700 can do respectable 3D, but again, you're going to be doing some optimizations. 2D, unless you're doing really intense physics or something, it's not going to be the end of the world. Also, SD cards are your main hard drive. Don't constantly write to these. You're going to have slightly slower input when you're trying to read from the SD, and it's going to suck if you start spamming a bunch of assets and logs and things all over the SD card. Especially, again, if your user hasn't switched out the Kioxia card or something and just have like some garbage, again, sugar wafer. It's going to explode and suck. Not explode. That being said, you should also probably keep your charger that came with the SP. Just heads up there. Again, these are really cheap. Typically 1 gigabyte RAM. That's again around the SP's range, or like a lot of the sub 100 Anbernic devices. You're usually looking at 100 gigs or 100 gigs. Wow, 1 gig. And even then, you're dealing with the fact that you're competing with the OS and you're competing with the runtime of your engine and the compatibility layers that are being used to run your game. These things kind of pile up too. But even then, you could do a lot with even just 500 megs if you're just, smart. Again, big games, this isn't really what this is for. And really, people are trying too hard if they're sticking to like Unreal and like hyper realistic assets. Come on now, you're just small resolutions. You're dealing with very small screens, at least relative to what you might be used to if you're only looking at your desktop all the time. 640 by 480, God's chosen resolution, is pretty fair. If you can balance your game around, or if you can at least like design up your game to run in that mode, and everything looks fine, you're in a very good spot. You could probably just put the game in and it'll just like look good. While pixel art games especially will do good. Again, low res 3D, it'll help. Controls are one of the trickier parts. You may want to have remapping. You want to carefully test. If you have like two devices, it helps to see like where some discrepancies might arise. Because often Nintendo layout versus Xbox layout and the way that the buttons are laid out, these things could actually vary between firmwares and hardware. Portmaster might have tools to help you with this. I'm still learning them myself though, and I haven't really bothered. Someone's told me how to fix this like 3 times, and I just haven't actually gotten around to doing it for Crop and Claw. Whoops, that is the opposite direction. F.A.Q. Can Unreal games be ported? No, go away. Unreal is bloatware. Can Unity games be ported? Unity is also bloatware, but someone, the guy who made like Backpack Hero or something, is really intent on getting this to run, to the point he is like given Portmaster tons and tons of compatibility tools. You have him to thank for the fact Godot even runs. Can C# games for Unity or Godot, whatever, be ported? No, not yet. I'm pretty sure it's possible some way. People have said like, yeah, C# running isn't the worst thing. I have absolutely no idea how to do it, or I would have probably helped with that. I've basically given them an example project to mess with, but everyone's busy. Portmaster is pretty much a great big like volunteer project. Portmaster game does not run on stock or modified stock OS. It's not supported. They just use one of the 4 I mentioned before, like MuOS or Rockinix are probably fine. Is this piracy? Can I play GTA 14 for free? No, you cannot. These are not free games per se. They're games that are either like licensed, freely distributable, or you can have the runtime, but the game data comes from your own personal copy. Allegedly. Either way, Portmaster itself does not actually condone piracy. Stop killing games. I am also going to put this out. Android game handhelds are a thing. So if you're a normie, or like you have built your games to a phone, you can do that. You can actually get one of these more expensive handhelds, usually somewhere from the 150 range upwards. Like this is the Retroid Pocket Flip 2. I actually have one of these. It's somewhere in the 200, 230 range USD. And it's rather really powerful, and it has a flip screen, and that's what matters. But most importantly, it's Android, and you can run games on it. You can also run Linux on it, depending on the CPU. But if you really are you just want to like go and show off that you can make games for these little platforms and like cool form factors, you can just grab an Android, one of these Android game handhelds, and that's also an option. Just more expensive because Android needs a little more beef to run. It's also just still better than a phone because phones suck to develop for. The downside, it is Android, and Android's just a pain to build for. But the upside, I guess your Unity game you made in college might work. Might as well if you really want to just get that running. Might even have access to Vulkan or something if you absolutely need the performance. But bear in mind that Portmaster isn't an Android thing, so anything I've said about Portmaster doesn't really apply here. But speaking of Portmaster, that's really where a lot of the efforts to get things running on these things actually comes from. I'm actually just an idiot that basically said, "Hell, hey, this is cool," and then I sat around and waited until I could bring Crop and Claw to it. But you can actually go to their Discord and get information and ask them the same questions that everyone else has asked them. And you can get some FAQs there in that other link that I'm looking at in whatever. Anyways, thank you for running through this. If you thought this was like the best video in all of cinema history, you should just go buy Crop and Claw 1 and then wishlist Crop and Claw 2. Alright, just do it. I'm tired and I'm poor. Just whatever, do it. Dragon game. I mean, come on. Oh, right, I guess I should actually mention that again. You can actually just download Crop and Claw for free on Portmaster. I actually just put it up there. Anyways, thank you for watching, I guess. Whatever. Get video games. I guess if you do actually port, you can like post in the comments or something like, "Yay! I got it running," or you can like show someone else like, "Wow, look at the game." Post it around. Like, I do actually want these little handhelds to get more notoriety for being developed on directly. They're really cool. It feels too niche. I want them to be less niche.